A Passion for Mushrooms by Chrononautical. Chapter 7. Gilded for Business. Without really knowing what to expect of Bomber's Guild, Bilbo dressed his best for dinner. Unfortunately, his best wasn't particularly impressive these days. He had a rather nice red dinner jacket crafted by Dory just after Bilbo's arm had started to heal enough to put one on. The friendly dwarf had sold it to the hobbit for 2 crowns and a bit of pipeweed, as though Bilbo would be shy about taking charity. Sadly, under the jacket he had only a mostly white shirt and rather threadbare trousers. Still, it was what he had, and it had been good enough for the king's table the night before. It would have to be good enough for Bomber's Guild. It definitely seemed to be good enough for Bomber, whose chubby cheeks stretched in a grin fit to break his face when he fetched Bilbo to show him to the guild hall. "You're in a fine mood tonight," the hobbit observed as his weighty friend practically skipped through the halls of Erebor.
"I am indeed," Bomber said. "For the second time, after long months of rough going, I have served to the king's table a meal of which I need not be ashamed. Beyond that, tonight I have burgled the burglar, and we shall have an even better supper than that."
Laughing, Bilbo said,
"You have not stolen me away. I offered Miss dinner in the great hall." "But you do not often come to dinner with me, and you have never visited a dwarven guild hall before this day. Welcome, Bilbo Baggins, to the Culinary Guild."
The enormous arched doors were made of gold. This was no unusual thing in Erebor, but Bilbo couldn't believe he'd never noticed them before. Granted, the city was vast and absolutely filled with expertly crafted treasures. Even so, the doors to the Culinary Guild were unique. Instead of runes and abstract carvings, they were sculpted into the scene of a wonderful feast. Looking upon them was like looking down at a huge table during a birthday party, where everything that was good to eat had been gathered. Bilbo saw meat and fruit, roasted lamb and golden apples so real he was tempted to have a bite of one, beautiful creations of pastry and elaborate appetizers. The desserts were so many in number and so detailed in depiction that the hobbit's mouth began to water. When the doors opened, Bilbo didn't step through. Instead, he kept staring at the bas-relief, trying to decipher every detail of the tempting dishes. Clapping a warm hand to the small of Bilbo's back, Bomber ushered him through.
"You can come back and have a proper look at the doors any time you like. I'm rather proud of them myself. As the commissioning financier, I had a lot of input in the designs."
"They're incredible," Bilbo said honestly. Chuckling, Bomber was a shade too modest to agree.
"Unfortunately, the rest of the hall is a bit less so just now. We may be established by the king's decree, but we still have to bid for skilled workers the same as everyone else. Getting us settled just isn't the same priority as making sure all of the public throughways are safe and reopening the mines."
"I think you have a lovely hall," Bilbo said, polite enough, but also true. For all that it did not compare in size or scope to the great hall of Erebor, the Culinary Guild Hall was enormous by hobbit standards. There were many arched doors off to either side, which Bomber referred to as storerooms, workrooms, and housing for apprentices, all of which Bilbo was welcome to explore if he liked. But the hall itself was centered around a single gigantic table shaped like a horseshoe. About 20 dwarves were already seated, most gathered towards the top of the arch, but it looked like the table might easily seat 100, and that was if they only sat around the outer edge.
"Good."
Bomber gripped Bilbo's shoulder tight for a moment before showing him to a seat next to Kira alongside the right-hand curve of the table. Bomber himself sat in a great chair at the apex of the horseshoe, but that was quite all right. It was a very good dinner, and Bilbo had dozens of questions about each dish, which Kira seemed more than happy to answer. Dwarvish cuisine really was a lot more than roasted meat and roast stews, Bilbo was coming to learn.
"How could I not have realized Bomber was part of such a wonderful guild?"
Bilbo asked aloud somewhere between a delightful course of breaded rockfish roe and a truly delicate cornmeal souffle. "Easily enough, I imagine," Kira said. "We have only existed for a few months."
"Is that so? For some reason I had thought that the guilds all existed in other places, that they were connected somehow."
"And so they are," Kira said. "A miner from the Blue Mountains may find welcome in his guild in the Iron Hills, though he has never before met any of them in person. Yet there has never been a culinary guild in any dwarven kingdom before the retaking of Erebor."
"Why ever not?"
"Leah, you may tell Mr. Baggins our history." Bilbo realized with some embarrassment that Bombur's lamb-like helper, with whom he was just as acquainted as Kira, had been seated to his right all evening. He had quite rudely neglected any conversation in that corner. The fault was all the more evident when the girl grinned, clearly very pleased to give him a history lesson.
For as long as the children of Mahal have eaten food, they have crafted it. Fire is our tool, and meat is never eaten raw. Did not Durin himself shape a cooking pot of ironwork and call it pleasing? Yet never was the pursuit of excellence in such a craft called dwarvish. Never was a cook called the master. For food is not iron, and a meal cannot be crafted to pass from one generation to the next.
Poppycock, Bilbo said, then quickly apologized for interrupting.
As you see, Lord Baggins.
Mister, please, there, we covered that this morning.
Master Baggins, she corrected. Those who pursue the craft in love have always known this to be untrue. Recipes and techniques may be passed on to others. Skill can be measured. There is a great difference between eating a meal cooked by the unskilled and enjoying one crafted by a master. Yet never was our right for self-governance recognized, nor the need to regulate our trade. Even as every tinker and tailor plied their trade, openly charging a fair price, our work went unrewarded, with only a pittance paid for time, since dwarfs must be fed. The last petition for a guild before Lord Bombers was made here in Erebor during the time of King Thor. He laughed at the idea that food could have value as anything more than fuel for better crafts, and sent the petitioners away with one word: no. It was only through Lord Bomber's prescience in joining the quest and King Thorin's great wisdom that we are now established here in Erebor. I count myself among the most fortunate dwarves in history to be able to train in the craft that calls to me by the great masters here.
I wish you joy in your studies, Bilbo said. From what I saw yesterday, you're very talented, and I cannot think of a better master than Mumba to study with. Anyone who can keep 13 dwarves and one hungry hobbit fed as well as he did with only hastily packed supplies has much to teach.
For some reason, Leia flushed at that, or she seemed to, at best, Bilbo could tell, given the low light and her extremely bushy brown beard. Instead of answering, she mumbled something that might have been thanks to a rather tasty salmon mousse. Bilbo turned back to Kira, who looked amused.
And I wish you the joy of your guild. It sounds long overdue.
Indeed it was,
Kira said amiably, and they went back to discussing the courses and the trick to getting Moose to stand up just so. Dinner really was magnificent, though Bilbo could tell that they had made much of little through hard work and the judicious application of excellent seasoning. For one thing, there was no meat at all on the table except for fish, and Bilbo expected that members of the Culinary Guild shared the general Dwaro preference for roasts ripe on the bone. Not that the lack bothered Bilbo in the least. Every dish was a delight, and plated with a great eye to beauty besides. Only after almost 2 hours did the courses flag, when Bomber rose to speak after the third dessert.
I have witnessed a masterly, he said without preamble, for when there was food and myself disparaged as bare sufficiency, a feast was made.
Bilbo put his hands together, thinking to applaud the lovely dinner, but as no one else did the same, he stopped and sat quietly. Across the table, Daro stood.
I have witnessed a mastery, she said. I was privileged to taste an ancient recipe made perfectly from memory alone.
Bilbo wondered which of the dishes had been an ancient dwarven recipe, but it seemed rude to ask Kira just then.
I have witnessed a mastery, said Gorful, for a master knows that not every dish is to be served on every occasion. I saw a meal prepared to work seamlessly, not simply impressed with as many embellishments as could be mustered.
It seemed as though everyone was going to compliment the meal. Bilbo tried to think of something appropriate to say, but it wasn't easy. The potatoes and cheese were particularly nice. Didn't seem to be in keeping with the general terms of expression.
I have witnessed a mastery, Kira said, for a master's knowledge is broad as well as deep, and he takes pleasure always in adding to that scope. I have witnessed a mastery,
Leia said, standing up very quickly. Suddenly Bilbo was quite glad that he hadn't been able to think of anything to say, for reactions around the table seemed to indicate that it was not entirely appropriate for the girl to join in. Still, Bomber gave her a nod, and she continued.
When I was ignorant, I was corrected with grace. My errors were noted before they could affect the outcome of our labors, but though time is always short in a kitchen, learning was given precedence over working without understanding.
Bilbo thought that was very fine indeed, and he was not alone. All around the table, dwarves were nodding in agreement that this was a quality to be desired in a kitchen with apprentices. Though it still didn't seem time for Bilbo to speak quietly to his seatmate, he reminded himself to congratulate Leia later for whatever part she had played in the creation of the meal. Even if it had only been peeling potatoes, any contribution to such a delightful dinner ought to be commended. For a long moment, it seemed as if no one else was going to say anything, and Bilbo wondered if he ought to just fill the silence.
Then Bomber said, "I'll hereby witness to the result. What say you, masters? Who among you has witnessed the masterly?"
Darrow, Kira, and Gorful all raised a fist, as did two other dwarves Bilbo did not recognize. Bumber appeared pleased by this result.
"What say you, craftsmen? Who among you witnessed the masterly?"
About 10 more fists were raised in the air, and Bumber looked even happier.
"Apprentices, have any of you witnessed the masterly?"
All of the remaining dwarves raised their fists immediately. Bilbo wondered if he ought to join in somehow, but as he was not included in the groups Bomber was specifically addressing, he kept his hands to himself.
"Very well then. Bilbo Baggins, lord of the mushroom mine in Edinburgh, Master Magnet. Given that no kingdom would ever allow a thieves' guild to build a hall within its borders, will you join our company as a master of the culinary arts?"
The hobbit blinked. What, me? Bomber laughed.
"Yes, you, my little friend, for I had not known you a week before I knew that you were a master in the kitchen. Join our guild and share with us the Shire ways of using mushrooms to make stew, and we will give you our secrets in turn."
Oh, well, of course, I should be very happy to. Thank you for the invitation, Bilbo said, a little uncertainly. That seemed to be enough for Bomber, however, who waved Bilbo out of his chair. Having him come up to the apex of the horseshoe table, Bomber presented the hobbit with a fancy jeweled lapel pin and an ornate wooden box with little stamps inside. Looking around the room, Bilbo saw that everyone who had raised a hand for the call of masters had a similar jeweled cauldron pin displayed prominently on their person, though not everyone wore it in the same place.
"Do you swear to Mahal that you shall keep our secrets and our codes, lest your maker shall unmake you and ban you from the halls of our fathers? That you shall never knowingly serve food which might harm the one who eats it? That you shall prepare all you serve to the best of your ability? That you shall help and guide others as they pursue a craft? That you shall work for the betterment of the guild? And that you shall pursue perfection in your craft all the days of your life?"
Bilbo thought about it for a moment. "I swear to Mahal and to Yavanna that I will keep the secrets and the codes of the Culinary Guild. I will never knowingly serve food that might bring harm. I will always prepare the food I serve to the best of my ability. I will help and guide others that pursue the craft. I will work for the betterment of the guild as I may. I will pursue perfection in my craft all the days of my life. If I do not keep this oath, may my maker unmake me and ban me from her far green country which has promised hobbits after death, and also the halls of the dwarven fathers. As suits them. I should never presume to tell that great lady and her lord their business." Laughter from the small group bounced around the hall, and Bilbo could see the guild the way Bomber wanted it to be. All of the empty chairs around the horseshoe would one day be filled at every dinner, and the majesty and grandeur of Erebor would imbue a ceremony such as this one with the dignity and history that came effortlessly to other guilds.
"I had forgotten how hobbits swear oaths,"
Bomber said, pinning the jeweled cauldron to Bilbo's jacket.
"Still, that will do well enough. Some were concerned about you swearing to Mahal alone, as you are right. He alone was not your maker."
"That is not how hobbits swear oaths," Bilbo said. Bomber tilted his head to one side curiously.
"I am not a dwarf,"
Bilbo said quietly, and a few of the guild members closest to him stopped laughing to listen.
"I do not presume to know your ways, but I have spent a little time with dwarves. I think I know this much, that your crafts come to you from Mahal. You do not choose them. Dwarves are born, made with the calling. It is not the same for hobbits, of course. The only call we ever hear is to the supper table." A small chuckle bounced around the table, and Bilbo knew that everyone was listening, though he did not look away from his friend's face. "Still, I know that those around this table who were called masters have spent their lives in pursuit of work that they must have believed would never be acknowledged or rewarded. You have spent your lives mastering a craft while knowing that such mastery would never be valued by your own people, and you pursued it anyway. You have worked at it every day, only to be scorned or to have your contributions belittled. That isn't fair. It isn't right. You deserve to have a guild as honored and respected as any other dwarf pursuing any other craft. And I will help you build it if I can."
The room was very quiet for a moment. Bomber's mouth opened and closed a few times. Then a big fat tear rolled down his ruddy cheek, and he was crushing Bilbo to his chest, bawling.
Aye, the dwarf cried. I have heard a hobbit oath just like that once before.
Patting his back awkwardly, Bilbo tried to pull away, but Bomber seemed to need a good long cry. It was quite mortifying, really, but since Bilbo could not see the other dwarves of the guild, he counted to 100 and pretended they were somewhere private. Eventually, Bomber did release him. Bilbo pretended not to notice as the big dwarf made use of a handkerchief. Putting his hands in his pockets, he politely ignored the loud trumpet of Bomber blowing his nose. And that again. And a third time. Bilbo fought the urge to whistle. He could not make eye contact with anyone else in the room under any circumstance. Oh dear! There was a fourth hooting sound followed by great sniffles.
If dwarvish emotions make you so uncomfortable,
Darrow said, catching his attention by pulling on his sleeve,
you should not make such speeches.
The gray-bearded dame had tears in her own eyes, though she was grinning fiercely up at Bilbo from her seat. Then she rose and hugged him as well. After quite a while, the ceremony resumed. Bomber, having washed his hands in a golden basin, handed Bilbo a bit of pickled ginger on a rather interesting green cracker. It was very good as a spicy palate cleanser, and Bilbo didn't realize right away that it was meant to be part of the ceremony until Bomber pushed him over to the basin and he washed his own hands. Still, he was no cotton-headed boffin. He figured out quickly enough that he was meant to put the ginger on the cracker, season it with a bit of chopped basil, and give one each to all of the members of the guild. Once that was through, everyone drank small glasses of liquor, and followed it with the swearing of more oaths. There were a lot of oaths, and even more tiny glasses of liquor. When Bilbo woke the next morning, it was to find himself underneath the big horseshoe table. Bomber was nearby, snoring in his guildmaster's chair. All around he could hear the familiar chorus of dwarven slumber. Honestly, after all such a night, the hobbit was not a bit surprised.